Megan Choritz is well known in the world of theatre for her directing, improvisation work, playwriting, and now she's written her first novel. I got to talk to her about it. So Megan Choritz, such a pleasure to talk to you today about this amazing book that you've written. You know, regular viewers of this show, perhaps other people, will know that I've actually interviewed you before about other work that you've done, and you're very well known in the theatrical community for your writing and your directing, and for your work in improvisation, which, like, you are the doyen, pretty much, of improvisational theatre in this part of the world. But a lot of people didn't know that you were just about to burst out to be a novelist. I knew.
You knew.
Because I seem to be like the only person around who actually read a previous novel by you.
But not only that, right? You always knew because you told me.
Right. I did tell you a very long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally like, I keep remembering that conversation. So you were a gift. A reading from you was a gift. A 30th birthday gift. And I remember you saying to me absolutely clearly, oh, look, la, 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 you're a writer. And I was like, I'm not a writer, I'm a performer, I make theatre, I'm, and the funny thing is that obviously I always have been a writer, but it's not ever been the thing that I have said I was.
But let's talk about Lost Property.
Lost Property.
This is the book that you've just published, and it's a novel, and as novels often don't, it seems to have taken South Africa by storm. I have read loads of reviews of this book. I have not seen one bad word, because I've read the book, so I know why. Everyone is so taken away by this book. And the not surprising, but the amazing thing about that is that it's not like it's an easy read, emotionally speaking. It's an easy read, reading speaking. You can easily read it because you don't want to stop within a couple of days. And I think most people felt that they couldn't quite stop.
Yeah.
So it's got that, I have to know what's going to happen, quality, it's got all of that to it. But just in the sense that it gets to you, the reader, very deeply, very fast. And that's what I mean by it's not an easy read.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, what you're saying is pretty much what I was hoping for, is that it wasn't going to be a labor to read it, but at the same time, it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, because how do you need at least the reading to be easy if we're going to go there, if we're going to go and do some really uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, without giving anything away, I'll say, so it's a book about a woman who grew up in South Africa in the 70s and has just been through the end of a marriage and is dealing with herself and gradually putting together really how her past and what's happened in her current life has come together, has defined her, and has led to the things that happen. And so there's a lot that people can relate to, in the sense of we all grew up, and it's not only for people of our age who grew up in the 70s, who can relate to everything that's so South African about this story. And that is also what makes it so readable. But it's also, I don't know how deliberately you did it, but it's also what makes it so able to get under your skin, the story and her feelings. Because, I have to say, your writing is incredibly good. Incredibly good. I mean, I don't know how to put it sometimes, and sometimes it was just the images that you made. I mean, there's an image of ravens in this book. I was just devastated. So you use these images and you say things about what Lane, the character, feels, but at the same time, there's a lot that you don't say, and I think that's what I'm feeling when I read it. And I'm relating it to her. And that's why it gets so deep and so under the skin.
Well, I think it's similar to that notion of, that acting notion of like, we don't want to see an actor cry, we want to cry.
Right.
And so I think that I think if I'm going to talk about like anything conscious or deliberate, it was very important for me that I didn't tip over into sentimentality. I think it's very, I think that when we move into sentimentality, when we start feeling sorry for our protagonist or whatever, then I think it becomes difficult because, and so it was very intentional of me not to get sentimental. And I think that's where it's easy to really, because she's she's unreliable and complicated and agonized, but she's not indulgent.
No, she's not. I mean, to me, in the beginning of the book, you do get the sense of how she doesn't really want to go there. So her initial memories of her early life, she's clearly sanitizing the emotional side away from herself, although eventually she can't keep it away any longer. But it does have that, but I think it is a masterclass in writing that obviously theatre also helps you understand, as you say, you wouldn't cry, not see the actor cry. Because that is so effective in this book of, I'm feeling the emotions that she surely is feeling or should be feeling, but you're not saying exactly. You're just giving me images and giving me little memories of hers that make me experience that. I mean, you know, so certainly for someone growing up in the same area as you, the memories of the 70s that are not the highlights, that are the everyday life that we had growing up in Johannesburg, as both of us did. But I also thought, you know, for younger readers who didn't grow up in that time, it also must be quite an eye-opener if they realize this is what the world looked like in those days.
Absolutely. And I think that was very important for me, is that we have to constantly acknowledge this utterly bizarre world, and that so much of the dysfunction that happens in a nuclear family, in an extended family, in a suburb, in a community, is as a result of this absolutely fractured insanity that was this very palatable apartheid.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a question a lot of people will have about this book is it an autobiography or is it fiction? Because it's too close to the bone to be pure fiction. It's almost like it has to be true. Someone can't be making this up. Is it?
So, it's very, very close to the bone. It's very close to the bone, and a lot of the stuff is 100% true. But more than it being true in terms of the incidents, it's true in terms of what it felt like. So I have made up stuff in order to put across feelings. I've invented certain people, places, things. Some things I stole from other people and made them Lane's story. Some things I changed in terms of timeline, so that it's incredibly difficult to see what is made up and what isn't.
Is it difficult to write? Is it difficult to go there, to draw on that? And do you find yourself getting drawn in, or do you find yourself even blurring the line between what you're making up and what was really there?
Totally difficult and easy. So, but I think that's just the general angst of writing. I think that some things are so difficult and then some things are so easy. And sometimes you just think it's just, it can gush.
No.
And then sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know if I can actually say or do that.
For me, I mean, reading it, a lot of times I thought, I don't know how you managed to write this.
I took a year.
Well, I mean, that's what it takes. But
but there are devices that can help you with that.
Well, the one device that you use consistently is very helpful in the kind of the warning at the beginning of every part that this is the part where this happens. And it's like, it's a fake warning because it still doesn't really warn or prepare you for some of the things that really grab you emotionally. But that is also a good device because I actually felt that you were keeping me safe, you the author, were keeping me safe by telling me that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's got that feeling of, obviously, of I'm going to take into my confidence.
I mean, it's interesting because for me also those moments of this is the part where are for me also like where it's delicious for me because actually it's where I can get poetic and where I can be, where it feels creative.
Yes. For me. I mean, in some ways, because I know you as a friend as well, I recognized you in those parts most of all. You know, in the autobiographical stuff, Charles said, I'm thinking as a friend, I wonder what's true. But reading that, I recognized you. I recognized your voice and your humor as well. Although devastating things do happen in this book, and you know, I'm not going to say what they are, but they are the kind of things that do sometimes shock you, or sometimes they never make it feel like I can't read this. They never like slap you away from it. They can give you a gut punch, but they don't give you a face punch that says, "Now what are you doing here?" You know, and that's also I felt that you lead us into that. I mean, the I don't know if I'll call it a major revelation. There's a revelation later in the book. And I think the way that you led us to that as well was incredibly sensitively handled. You know, it did, and made such sense to how the characters had been until that point. And so I felt appreciative that you didn't use it as a shock tactic of any kind, that you led me there with enough understanding of the characters to actually enrich the story, enrich me in discovering that.
Yeah, I think, I love that you say that, and thank you for saying that, because I think that, especially when you're writing in first person, you have to consider that you're only hearing that viewpoint. You're only hearing the view of the I, and that actually the discovery is that, and I think that that is something that I did think about throughout the book, is that every single other person's going to have a point of view.
Yeah.
And that's really...
And you know, the interesting thing is that there's some things in that book then and there that might be construed as triggering. So I was thinking about that, and I realized the triggers happen inside the reader. They don't actually happen in the text. You know, because I felt it got me to think back to not only what was it like in the 70s, but to suddenly realize certain triggers that were in me that are not the same as ones that occur in this book, but that works the same way. It just brings out this kind of emotional memory.
Yes.
That's non-specific, but it is an emotion.
And it does trigger. It literally...
Yeah, it does. Although at the same time, you know, it's quite healing as well. I mean,
that's the whole point. Because if it isn't, then, well, certainly for me, if it isn't, then I believe that the reader is shortchanged.
That's interesting. So when you started writing the book, what was your intention? Was it a process that you needed to go to, or a story that you needed to tell to them, the reader?
I think it was both. And interestingly enough, it travelled on a very organic path. So when I sat down to write, I kind of had an idea of what I was going to be needing to say, but I had absolutely no idea how it was going to look, and I certainly didn't have any understanding of the form or structure or any of that. And that built, and it was quite organic. And so sometimes I would be very deliberate, and then sometimes I would just let it happen. And there was very little that changed from the first draft.
Wow. I mean, writing is a very disciplined process. What was your process? Do you get up in the morning first thing, or did you have a structured discipline process?
It was all different. Sometimes I just couldn't stop. So sometimes I was waking up at 5 in the morning and taking my laptop into bed with me and writing, and sometimes really, really struggling because not knowing what that scene was going to be like, and kind of sitting down and then sort of getting distracted and writing something else or writing a review or whatever. But I mean, also, Rod, to be absolutely honest, I mean, I was in therapy and my therapist said, you need to write this. and I was like, I don't know how. And then I was lucky enough to find the how of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then there are the birds.
Then there are the birds.
You know, so there's this, I mean, I look, before I read this book, before I even owned this book, I saw the cover and I saw this bird and I thought, oh, fun. The bird peeping up at the front of the book and the kitchen things. I thought, oh, it's going to be one of those fun, rompish relics. Because I'd read the first book.
Yes.
Especially with that bird looking at me like that. It's like, hello. But boy,
No.
that's not what the birds are in this book.
No.
And the birds are extraordinary characters that seem to sit in this liminal space between Lane's youth, the now, the real world, the not real world. These birds easily move between all these places, and they were really quite amazing. Is it a thing for you? Did you deliberately choose it as a device? Where does that come from?
So it is interesting. I mean, I've played with the notion of birds and birds as messengers and birds in some of my other writing, in my one-woman show, Drive With Me. There is very much birds as messengers, and I've always had a love of birds, so I've always noticed them. And as I got into the book, I started realizing them as a character almost, but that it wasn't one particular bird, but that, and so I, as a writer, really loved how they felt. But I think that I found it very helpful to have the birds as voyeur, to have the birds as forces of destruction, to have the birds as conversation, and yeah, so that.
I mean, there were lots of different species that helped achieve that, but you know, not a species. The birds that got to me most, the tiny little birds you see when you close your eyes, birds, those ones.
Yeah.
I find the birds kind of like almost threaded the whole thing together for me, this underlying texture that held the whole thing together. I mean, that's the weirdest thing maybe about this book, is that it's real enough to be triggering, and yet it's got this unreal, slightly unreal element, or this slightly alternate reality element. And maybe that's also why, as I've said, gets beneath your skin, is that it manages to push past the hard edges of reality a little bit.
Yeah.
And that maybe also gives me space to feel and experience some of those emotions that Lane experienced and that other characters in the book have experienced as well. It tells me, the reader, you know, interrogate your memories and remember what was real, because Lane, like a lot of white kids growing up in South Africa, had the wool pulled over her eyes. She didn't understand why. She couldn't understand why was Dora never in the car. You know, those kinds of things she understands as an adult, and that's why I say young people need to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And anyone reading the book needs to understand, can I go back? Can I look back at me? Can I redeem something and be who I wasn't able to be when I was little? Because I didn't understand something, because I didn't know.
Absolutely. And I mean, that particular thing, I'm hoping, is an invitation to white people in particular. Just check.
It has to be. You know,
It has to be. I'm desperate for that.
You don't push it in anyone's face. I don't know if you even use the word apartheid anywhere. Maybe once, maybe not at all.
I think just to describe those like kind of incidents that happened in the 80s.
Yeah, that's when you do mention it. But other than that, it you know, that's what also, it's an uncomfortableness that I can't blame the author on. That it's somehow been stirred up in me, but just those images that you give me that bring memories, or that just bring, not necessarily memories of being in Johannesburg, because you didn't need to grow up in Johannesburg, to also understand I was in that past.
Yes.
And I was only a child, but that doesn't excuse me. Now I can understand, and I need to go back there.
And also, I think so many people have forgiven their parents what they just didn't know or
Yeah.
whatever. And the truth of the matter is actually, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah.
How did these white suburban, often pseudo-liberal
Yeah.
people be okay with that world, you know?
Exactly.
And they could only have been okay with that world if they were properly dysfunctional. And so everyone was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why did you call the book Lost Property?
Do you know what's hilarious? I had written a play called Lost Property, which it was a bit of a precursor of
Yes.
this in one aspect. And I was really struggling for a title for this book, and it was called something else. And Melinda, my publisher, was like, what are we going to call it? And we went through, we had a couple of ideas, and I said, well, look, if I think about the two titles of things that I like, that I've written, one is my play Clouds Like Waves, which is a title that I love, and Lost Property. And she was like, that's the name of your book.
Can't have named anything
And
else.
it's so true,
Yeah.
because it is about lost property
It totally
stuff,
is, yeah.
but it's also about lost identity,
Yeah.
and it's about that box that is left at school.
Yeah, and it's also about lost belonging, because properties are also
Totally.
belongings, you know.
Totally.
So it's
And
about
also
belonging.
the person as property
Yeah,
in relationship.
very much
You
so
know.
in this story.
Yeah.
But I do feel that I kind of felt found at the end of it.
Yeah,
And
a little
I think
bit.
she felt a little bit found as well.
Yes.
I mean, there's no magical cure for life. And, you know, there's a point, I guess, with all books, by the time I'm halfway, I'm slightly worried. Am I going to get found at the end? Am I being led into a darker and darker place, or what?
And with this, it does feel like that.
There are moments where you
Yeah.
think there can't be any redemption.
Sure.
But I felt at least redeemed. You know, I did feel I have been found, and you did get through to me what you were trying to get through to me. I have to say, I mean, the book, folks, you really have to. I mean, not just because it's by a South African writer, which we love the most, but also because it's brilliant writing, it's a necessary story, and it's also a journey. It's a journey that, you know, for me, books should take you on a journey. They're
Yes.
not just a narrative that's got a nice story in it, that's fun, but you need to go on a journey, and this will take you on a journey that will have you holding your breath, will have you crying, not horrible crying, so it'll be fine, no. It was such an also powerful thing calling them parts, not chapters,
Yeah.
because there's a big difference between what those two words can mean. And chapters is chapters, but parts can be of a person as well.
Absolutely. And also parts, I think that part of the reason why the idea of parts appealed to me was because you put parts together with each other, and
Right.
then sometimes they separate
Yeah.
out, and sometimes this is a standalone part, and sometimes this is attached to something else.
Yeah, exactly. So it really did begin to feel like that. Feel like I need to put myself back together sometimes. But it's an amazing accomplishment. Really.
Thank you,
I'm really,
thank you.
really looking forward to the next one. But I don't really want to lose the feeling of this one. So I'm like, you know, I don't really want to read things. I'm reading a bit of non-fiction so that I don't replace the feelings for a while.
Oh,
And just to like let it sit with me, read it.
I've been struggling to read. That's my big thing. So I've gone back to what I always do when I'm struggling to read. And
Read
that's
something from the past.
Stephen King.
Oh, me too. I adore Stephen King.
I'm so happy
Yeah.
that you say that.
I think he's one
I'm
of the great
literally
writers.
reading fairy tale at the moment because he's what I need in terms of that amazing combination of nostalgia and fear.
Yeah.
And I think I'm hoping that there are
Oh,
threads of that.
very much so.
But
Very-
because that's
yeah.
what I'm interested in when I read.
That's
is that it's
really
easy to
interesting,
read.
yeah.
It's easy. It's not hard work because his characters are so real and because
Yeah.
his style is so accessible.
Yeah.
But it's that
Yeah.
fear, nostalgia, those things together.
Amazing. Well, he does it by writing horror, but cleverly writing about people, and you do it by writing about life, which is plenty to fear, but plenty to find, be redeemed from. So, thank you for this. Looking forward to the next one.
You can get the book anyway.
Yeah, it's available online. It's on Kindle.
It's on Kindle. It's on Amazon.
It's in
on
local
Loot,
bookstores.
It's in local bookstores.
Yeah. Get it, read it, and I'll see you again next week.